Hello and welcome to our session on mental health and wellbeing. I'm Laura James and I'm part of the talent acquisition team at Enterprise in the UK and Ireland. In the next 50 minutes, we're going to answer the big questions on your minds as students today. It's fair to say the last 12 months have affected us all. It has provoked real life changes, dredged up unfamiliar emotions, and really impacted us in very different ways. In this session, we're going to look to give you some tangible advice to help you through those changes, and also give you some takeaways as you enter your next journey, whether that be more study or entering the world of work. I'm by no means an expert in this field, but thankfully I know 3 people who are. I'm joined by 3 fantastic mental health and wellbeing professionals today. Amy Henderson from Business in the Community, Alice Cooper from Student Minds, and Amy Louise Carton, who co-founded the app Keep Happy. They all have fantastic experience and fantastic advice to share with you. So let me tell you a little bit more about each of them. Firstly, let me introduce you to Amy Henderson. Amy is a wellbeing advisor at an organisation called Business in the Community. Business in the Community are a charity who are helping businesses to be responsible in lots of different ways, whether it be their impact on the environment, on diversity and inclusion, or indeed wellbeing, and that's where Amy comes in. Amy firstly graduated from the University of Exeter with a degree in psychology. She then went on to study a master's at King's College London in war and psychiatry. After that, Amy quickly moved into the charities sector with roles in Save the Children UK and now Business in the Community. Amy's role today is to work with businesses and organisations on their wellbeing strategy and approach. She helps them look at how they can really meaningfully make a big impact on employees' health and wellbeing. She helps them to look at what services and support they provide and how they can be much better employers in the wellbeing space. Next, let me introduce you to Alice Cooper. Alice is the Corporate Fundraising Officer at Student Minds, the UK's student mental health charity. Alice attended the University of Warwick, and during her student years, she took on several extracurricular roles. First to note is her position of Student Support Officer, where she worked alongside students with disabilities. She also acted as the University of Warwick's Society Events Liaison Coordinator for their International Women's Week, and was celebrated amongst her peers by winning the NUS's 2017 Women's Campaign of the Year Award. Alice graduated in 2017 with a BA in English and French and has since worked in corporate fundraising in the charity sector and business development in the private sector. She has also lived and worked in France on 3 separate occasions with roles in teaching and in the hospitality industry. Today, her job revolves around creating meaningful partnerships with businesses who seek to champion mental health in higher education and support student minds. Together, Student Minds and their business partners are able to empower students with the knowledge, confidence, and skills to look after their own mental health, to support others, and to create change. And last, but by no means least, I'd like to introduce you to Amy Louise Carton, the co-founder of the mental wellness app Keep Happy. Amy studied an undergraduate degree at Trinity College Dublin, specialising in sociology. She then went on to study her first master's in political science at the University of Amsterdam, and then her further master's in entrepreneurial skills back at Trinity College in Dublin. Amy's journey to her current position has been a long one, and it saw her reach a real low when she attempted suicide. Thankfully, she found the support that she needed, and since she has used her own experience to find ways of supporting others. Amy co-founded Keep Happy in 2018 and now has users in 130 countries. She is on a mission to leverage tech for good, to destigmatize mental unwellness, and to empower people with the tools that they need to regain control over their well-being. Her aim is to create the most comprehensive and engaging wellness app out there, something that can be used by all.
Mental health. My favorite topic. I've built my career around it, but it's a really tough one when we start talking about it in the workplace. And that's because of the stigma around mental health. Before I go too further, there are two concepts we need to understand. There's mental illness, which are diagnosed disorders or chronic illnesses that affect a person's ability to interact with their wider world. And that can be depression, it can be personality disorder. I have borderline personality disorder. It can be a stress disorder or anxiety. There's so many different elements to mental illness, but they affect 1 in 4 people around the world. That's the statistic that comes out of the World Health Organization. So 25% of your colleagues will experience a mental illness at some point in their life. So really, when we put that into perspective, it's actually a huge portion of the workforce experiences mental illness. Now let's talk about mental health. So mental health is the exact same as physical health, except it's focusing on the mental well-being and stability of the individual. So what that means is it's not a diagnosed disorder. It is simply the highs and lows before a deadline, or the Monday blues, or waking up on the wrong side of the bed. It's our emotional range of going from good days to bad days. And it's learning how to manage those good and bad days. So when we talk about mental health, we all have it. We all experience highs and lows. We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And we all need to work proactively on our mental health to engage it, to maintain it, to build up resilience, just like we do with our physical health. We need to build up our physical health to be functioning as best as we can, to optimize our health and our well-being for future. And it's the same with our mental health. So it is incredibly present in the workplace, and it's so exciting that during lockdown, perhaps the good thing to come out of it is that corporates are incredibly aware of mental health now, and it's a really big part of the conversation. So it's an exciting time to be entering into the workforce because your employers know just how important it is to protect your well-being. So if you're concerned about this at all, it's changing and it's getting better.
So how common are mental health conditions? Probably more common than you'd expect. So when we're looking at the student population, about 1 in 5 students will have a diagnosed mental health condition at any given time, according to the latest Mind research. Of those conditions, most commonly, students are affected by anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. But of course, as we know, we all have mental health, and we can all experience mental ill health at different points in our life, particularly at times where you might have things like exam stress or be away from home without your usual support networks. So we know that poor mental health is quite even more common than the diagnoses might lead us to believe. In the work population, we know that about 1 in 6 employees at any given time would benefit from some mental health support. And actually, some research that we did last year, our mental health at work report, which we produce annually, showed that 41% of employees are experiencing poor mental health where work was a contributing factor. And that's really substantial when you think about it. We would never go to work and expect to be physically harmed. We wouldn't stand for it. But people are going to work and being mentally harmed. They're experiencing poor mental health where work's a contributing factor. So a lot of the work that I do in my role as a wellbeing advisor and business in the community does on a sort of a national level is really trying to shift that so that one, workplaces aren't harming their staff mentally, but two, actually when workplaces get it right and they have really good jobs that are designed to promote mental health, work can be a really good source of encouraging positive mental health and well-being. So we're really trying to shift that dial in the workplace setting. So I think this is a really beautiful question because it's so human, isn't it? How do you handle that sense of rejection or failure to get a job, particularly when it's multiple rejections or they've all come at once? How do you feel and how do you respond to that? I think especially given my line of work and my experience personally to date, first and foremost, would really encourage you just to be really self-compassionate and really kind to yourselves. We know that because we are such social human beings and social creatures, we have that real need to feel like we belong and to be accepted. And actually, rejection can be really painful. In our brain, when we are rejected, we experience the same type of feeling as physical pain. So, on a really physical, emotional, and mental level, rejection is really hard for us. So, be compassionate, be kind to yourself when you get a rejection. Do whatever you need to do to be able to process that rejection. Listen to what your body, your heart, your soul is telling you to do. Scream if you want to scream, ignore it if you want to ignore it for now. Curse, whatever you need to do, laugh it off in that moment to help you to sit with that moment, to accept how you're feeling, and to be able to process it in that moment, whatever that means to you in a really meaningful sense. And then what I would say is that when you've had some time and some headspace and you're coming back to think about that rejection, as it were, really try to think about what you might have taken from it. So I'm going to use some language and steal some theory from positive psychology, which is a certain area within the sort of psychological literature now, and encourage you to reframe the narrative. So some people might think of it as a rejection, but actually that's such a loaded word in itself, right? There's so much that comes with the word rejection: failure, not being good enough, that sort of not having that sense of self-worth. So there's so much that's loaded in that. So I definitely try and encourage you to reframe and to use language is much more helpful to help you move forward. So it's not a rejection, it's a learning and an experience that will help you to with the next role. So think about what you've taken from the experience. Is it learning that actually when you ask the questions, maybe you're not as confident as you would like to be and you want some more practice? Is it that actually you were really unprepared for the questions, and going back to the job description to think about how they might have come up with those questions, so that when you're there for the next one, for the next role, or for the next time that you put your CV in for a job, you have something, you've gained something from the experience, which you first thought of as a rejection, but actually now think of as a learning opportunity for the next time and the role that will be right for you.
We know that applying for jobs can be a stressful experience for anyone, and it can be particularly difficult if you don't get an offer or miss out on an interview. At Student Minds, we know that the usual pressures of job hunting can be challenging enough without having to worry about the effects of coronavirus. You might be feeling more worried than usual, and newspaper headlines can make the jobs market seem even more uncertain. But it's important to note that graduate jobs are among the least affected by the pandemic. On Student Space, which you can find at studentspace.org.uk, we've got lots of helpful information and tips to help you stay motivated during your job search. A few examples are: take time out and reflect. Take a break, time away is really important. And then when you are ready to sit down and reflect on the process, you may be feeling more motivated. Ask for feedback. You don't have to do this reflection on your own after the interview. It might be a good idea to do it when you're there. Remind yourself it isn't personal. Whether you get the job is not always entirely about your performance. There can be many different factors that come into play during a recruitment process. And finally, practice makes perfect. Like all things, applying for jobs takes practice. The more you do it, the more you learn from it, and the better you will get at it.
And at the end of the day, you're going to be okay. You will find your career, you will find your job. I was so all over the place until I finally figured it out that it's a numbers game, that you just have to keep trying. And some people might have it easier and some people might have it harder, but you will get there in the end. Don't worry. Oh, I love a good proactive person. Firstly, well done for being proactive about your mental health when you know a period of change is coming. That is very great of you. So when you're trying to be proactive in your mental health, you kind of have to think of yourself sort of like a flower, which I know is a really weird way to phrase it, but you need sunlight, you need fresh air, and you need water and food. Very important that we take care of our physical health as much as our mental health. And the reason for that is that dehydration is one of the biggest impactors on our mood. So if we feel dehydrated, our mood plummets. Also, when it comes to food, a lot of the neurons that a lot of the neural pathways that are triggered by dopamine, or that identify dopamine and create dopamine, are in our gut. They're like tied to our diet. So it's really important that we provide enough nutrition for our brains to maintain wellness. If you are going through a period of stress, so you know that this period of change is going to be stressful for you, it's really important that you start building out a structure. So setting goals, having a habit tracker or a time tracker can be really helpful, because you can strike them off at the end of the day, have that dopamine kick, feel good about yourself for achieving something. Plus, you feel a bit more controlled. It's important to feel control during a time of change, control in your day, in your daily routine, in how you look, how you present yourself. So really try to structure that out. It's also great to practice gratitude. I did not believe in gratitude at all, and was quickly advised by my psych team that this is not true. It can be incredibly beneficial, and it is now one of the most used functions on our technology. So really cannot speak more highly of gratitude. So just at the end of every day, write 3 or 5 things that really just made you smile, that made you feel good about yourself. So did you catch yourself in the mirror and feel you looked pretty? Did you have a great cup of coffee? Did you have a good conversation with a friend? Like, keep it small. Did you see a beautiful flower or sunshine? And really just focus on optimism and positivity. And it's a great way for rewiring your thinking to positivity. And then finally, if you're stressing and you're struggling and the time of change is really getting to you and you're starting to feel overwhelmed, that's okay. Be kind to yourself. Times of change are very stressful for us as individuals. We as animals like our consistency, we like our routines. But it's important, we're kind of like dogs. You know the way dogs like a routine? Well, humans do too. Sorry, I love dogs. But it's important to maintain that routine. But if you are feeling overwhelmed, a really good way to battle stress and manage it is to process it, untangle it. Why are you feeling stressed? What is the deeper root behind it? Can you untangle it? Did something happen during the day? Are you not getting enough sleep? What is causing you to feel this overwhelmed? And can you break it down and dive deeper? Are you stressed because you're worried about the future? What about the future is making you concerned? How can you mitigate or manage that? Is it a rational thought that you're experiencing? I really start to process it. Too often we avoid or ignore stress, when really the best way for tackling it is diving right in, which I know is kind of weird, but it works.
So it's important to recognise that we all have mental health, just as we all have physical health, and that our mental well-being can fluctuate day to day. When you're not feeling great, it's understandably going to feel harder to take action to benefit your well-being. However, there are small steps we can all take in our everyday lives to look after our mental well-being. Some of these small steps which can help are getting into a good sleep routine, doing something that you enjoy, and making time for physical activity. We know that life gets busy, and at times it can feel hard to find the time to look after yourself. If you've got 5 minutes, why not make yourself a cup of tea or coffee and enjoy it undistracted? If you have 10 minutes, why not listen to some of your favourite songs and do a clean of your space? Think about what brings you joy and try and build that into your routine more. It's so important to recognise that you are human and that there are only a certain number of hours in the day for you to fill with work and eating, sleeping, resting, exercising. There's a lot that we need to achieve in a day. And I think it's so important to recognise that you're only going to have time to do a certain amount of things. There is only going to be a certain amount of achievements in any given day. It's also key to reflect who is putting the pressure on you that you're feeling. Is it external pressure? Could it be coming from employers or your personal tutors at university? Or is it coming from yourself? And if it is coming from yourself, are there ways that you can make that pressure more beneficial and less burdensome for you and for your mental health and well-being? It's also super important to have a good work-life balance. It's key, really, especially now with working from home. I found that doing things that really signify an end of my working day are super helpful for me. So I try and get out for a walk when I've shut down my laptop for the last time that day, so that I'm not tempted to think about work again, and work will begin again the next morning when I open that laptop back up. So that walk I've found to be really beneficial.
So this might be one of my favourite questions that I've had in a very long time. How do you proactively manage your mental health if you know you're going to have a stressful time coming up? And when I was thinking about how best can I answer this and how do I do this myself, I kept coming back to that analogy or saying you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think this is really key to sort of how to cope if you know something's coming up, which might be emotionally, mentally, physically demanding or draining of you. Because in order to be able to respond to that situation, you need to have enough substance in your cup, or your battery's fully charged, or however you want to think about it, to be able to give some of your energy to the situation or to the person, because it is going to drain you. So when I'm thinking about how can we proactively respond when we know that something is coming up in our lives which will be stressful and will drain you, will deplete your cup a little bit, I think about it in a few different ways that you can keep your cup maintained as much as possible. So the first thing I would do is really reflect on your coping strategies. So coping strategies are ways that we process or think about or kind of sit with feelings and emotions that we experience. And some coping strategies are healthier than others. So an example of some healthy coping strategies are, really making sure you get good quality sleep, trying to have that nutritious sort of balanced diet as much as possible, and things like physical activity in whatever way physical activity is accessible to you. Things like that and meditation will all help to keep your cup sort of fully feel full so that you can respond to stressful situations. Unhealthier coping strategies are things like avoiding a situation because you kind of hope that it will get better even though deep down you know it won't. Or my favourite, probably overindulging in things like chocolate or cupcakes, or really maybe you often hear the words eating your feelings, or even been thinking about it to a bigger degree, things like over reliance on alcohol or drugs to an excessive level, or all ways of perhaps more unhealthily coping with feelings that you're going through. So really think about the strategies you're using to keep your cup full. I would also really recommend that you book in rest and recovery times where you can really recharge your batteries or keep your cup full, so that before you even get to the moment where that stressful thing is coming up, you've carved out that space to really let yourself recover from the stressful event or situation that is in front of you. So that would be my top tip. Really good question. So there's a number of things that businesses are currently doing to support new employees with their well-being. So first and foremost, an absolute minimum, line managers, when you start a new job, should be sitting down with you and talking first and foremost about you and who you are and how you are before getting into the role or what you've been employed to do. Very much putting you at the forefront of that, talking about your health, talking about your well-being and how they'll be able to support you in the coming months. The second thing which employers are doing is sharing resources, sharing access and information about different support that you can access in an organisation. So this could be more formal things like networks, employee networks that you can join, or information on any in-house support like employee assistance programs or benefits that you might get, or it could be those more informal things, so letting you know who's the go-to person in IT if you have any problems, what are those insider bits of information and buzzwords and acronyms that you need to get your head around to help you start to feel settled and to calm any anxieties you might have about your new role. And then finally, really giving you a full and proper and thoughtful induction process. So many organisations will have a programme for new starters where you'll get to meet other new starters and learn more about the organisation, its values, its mission, how it's structured. And all of these things will help you to feel a bit more settled in and a little bit just calmer and supported within the workplace in your first few weeks and months as a new starter.
Wow, you guys are great for the tough questions. Okay, so I'm probably the worst person when it comes to recognizing mental illness in yourself, or in myself, I guess. I did not recognize it. I struggled from the age of 8 until I was diagnosed at the age of 23. That's 15 years. I struggled alone. I was self-harming, purging, having constant suicidal ideation. I was incredibly negative. I would go through highs and lows. And I thought because I wasn't in a straitjacket or one of those rooms with all the pillows on them, like you see in the movies, that I was fine. I was like, I'm not mentally ill. I'm not mentally ill. It's normal to want to kill yourself. It's normal to want to do all these things, to be doing these things. Obviously, it's not. It's taken me a long time to realize that not everyone goes through these thoughts or these periods of darkness. And yeah, recognizing it in yourself is honestly just about being truthful to yourself. Is this a normal behavior? And if your friend came to you and told you about these behaviors, would you be concerned for their well-being? If you answer no to either of those, you should go see a doctor. And it's great to see a doctor. You get to tell them and unload all the stress and concern and heartache you've been feeling and get help. It's extraordinary. I sometimes didn't want to get help. I liked my darkness, which is a really hard thing to say. I liked the safety of it. And yet, no, it was a weird time for me. So if you recognize anything that I'm saying, it's okay to get help. Recognizing it in others. So that's an interesting conversation because too often the narrative around mental health and mental illness is that they're invisible illnesses. We can't see them impacting the individual. You can't read their mind. When actually going through a mental trauma or the mental darkness that is mental illness, it does have a very physical and real expression. So is the person losing or gaining weight? Are they acting out of their norm? So are they doing things that are not normal for them? Are they being very self-deprecating? Are they talking about how stupid or ugly or horrible they are? Are they not engaging with you in the way they would have before? So are they not laughing at your jokes the way they used to, or has their humor changed? Do you notice bags under their eyes or them yawning a lot? Are they talking about being tired constantly? Sleep is a huge issue when it comes to mental illness. And, there's so many things you can see, but really at the end of the day, it's just about asking someone, how are you? How are you feeling? What's going on? And ask twice. Ask what's really going on. I think a lot of people with mental illnesses feel like they're a burden, that they're burdening people with the constant refrain of darkness, that they feel miserable, that they feel okay, but really they feel terrible inside. So it's okay to ask twice. You won't trigger anything in them. In fact, you'll probably be the helping hand that they need. I wish someone had asked me twice because I always said I was fine. I always said, no, I'm grand. When really if someone had probed deeper, they would have understood that there was a lot going on inside of me. So that's a lot to unpack. And I'm sorry for kind of word vomiting it all, but just remember that help is always there. If you are struggling, it's okay. You are not alone. I say this a million times a day, and sometimes I think people forget it. I forget it sometimes, but it's going to be okay.
The main thing to look out for would be big changes in behaviour. So if you're noticing that you've experienced changes in behaviour, our recommendation would be to speak to your GP if you're worried about yourself, and reach out to them to discuss the changes in your behaviour, the changes in your feelings, and ask them what the next steps may be, what support services may be available. If you're worried about a friend, we have lots of information in the Student Minds Look After Your Mate guide, including how to start a conversation, support for specific mental health difficulties, and also, importantly, tips to look after yourself whilst you're also looking out for somebody else.
So if you're not ready to declare that you have sort of poor mental health or a mental health condition at the moment to your employer, please don't let this stop you from accessing support. There's a number of different ways you can do this completely confidentially. So I'm going to tell you three. So the first one being accessing any in-house support that your employer provides that's confidential. Now, when you join your organisation, there'll be certain types of support, such as occupational health, for instance, where usually HR or your line manager will need to know about your condition or your experience so that they can put the support in place. But there'll be other ones, such as, for instance, employee assistance program, which many organisations have, where you can access support completely confidentially and for free. So an employee assistance program, to give you an example, is support where they provide a helpline that's 24 hours access, 7 days a week, and you can call them at any time to talk about how you're feeling, what symptoms and things you might be experiencing, and then talk about actually what support might be right for you. Through the employee assistance program, you can usually access up to 6 counselling sessions for free, although it does depend on the provider. And also other things like legal advice or financial advice. There's lots of different options of support depending on your situation and the provider that your work will use. So definitely worth seeing if you have some of the support in-house. You don't have to go to your manager to ask for the information to access it. It should be told to you at your induction process as you go through, and there should also be information online, whether that's for your intranet or sort of knowledge sharing platform about your employee assistance program or any support that is available to you. So that's number one. Number two is a government service called, I'm going to check, the Access to Work Mental Health Support Service. So this is a government service that is funded by the government and run through an organisation called Reemploy. And this it was designed to help keep people mentally healthy and well, to make sure that they stay in work and they don't have to take sick leave. And through them, again, it's completely confidential. No organisation will never know that you've contacted them, but you'll be able to access up to 9 months sort of mental health support. And what they'll do is they'll create a tailored work-focused mental health support plan to help you in work, talk to you about coping strategies, resources, reasonable adjustments that you could ask for to help you manage sort of your mental health in the workplace over that 9-month period. So that's the second one. And then thirdly, there are so many good resources out there at the moment. And particularly what I love about resources that you can get from organisations like Mind or Mental Health Foundation is that they will have a resource which really fits how you're feeling in that moment in time. They've got really specialist information about different conditions that you might experience, but also what loneliness feels like during lockdown, how it's like, what support there is to young people, and so on. So there's some really good, really quality, tailored resources and information out there from really reliable charities too. There's 3 ways.
Deciding to tell your employer if you have a mental illness is an incredibly personal decision. And if you don't feel comfortable telling them right now, that is okay. There are ways you can manage it. And the best way for managing mental illness in the workplace is managing workflow. So protecting yourself against feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work you have or stress in the lead up to a deadline. And the best way to do that is to work closely with your manager about expectations and goals. So really structure that and be strict with yourself with those guidelines or those deadlines. Really focus on building up your own ability to manage that workflow. If you do feel comfortable with your team lead, your manager, or whoever is your closest point of contact above you, and you do feel comfortable enough with them, you can disclose that maybe you sometimes get a bit overwhelmed and you want to mitigate that and work with them to manage it. That's okay. You don't need to disclose anything. You can just work around it. Obviously, and this goes without saying, there are so many supports that you can find outside of work. So whether that's taking medication, I love my antidepressants. They really help stabilize me. Or going to therapy. Talk therapy is a phenomenal resource and has ridiculous amount of proven evidence behind it. If you struggle with those, the financial bearing, I know obviously with NHS, the medication side of it is okay. But if you struggle to get access to care, there are other solutions out there. Does your workspace have access to psychology? Does it have access to therapists or a helpline? What are the different solutions that are available to you? Because they're all kept confidential from the company in most circumstances. So figure out what's the best route for you. And really it's about figuring out in every part of your life what's the best thing for you. What food helps you feel the most stable? Is sleep a big part of your stability? Is exercise? Figure out the things that are helping you to take care of yourself. There's so much we can do about our mental illnesses. And it's really just about fighting for ownership and figuring out what's best for you.
At Student Minds, we don't have a recommendation either way on this one because each person's experience of mental health illness and difficulties are their own, and it's important to recognise what you're comfortable with. And if you need extra help or extra measures, either at the interview stage or when you have secured employment, it's important to let people know so that you don't go without that extra help. I think at Student Minds we have a really great initiative called Wellbeing Action Plans. So this is something that we fill out towards the beginning of our work experience at Student Minds, and that basically acts as a user manual for that staff member and talks about things like if they have experience of mental health difficulties, what mitigations would they find helpful. It also has information about how they like to be communicated with, and things like that generally are good for other staff members to be aware of or their line manager to be aware of, so that that person can have the best working experience at Student Minds. I think for more expert information on this, citizens' advice are best to be referred to here.
So there's no wrong or right time as to when to disclose that you have a mental health condition in your workplace. It will be a very personal decision and based on your own unique circumstances and whether you feel safe to disclose that to your employer. So there's no answer for you per se in that respect, but in terms of things that I would be looking out for when I'm applying to organisations, where to see whether I might feel safe disclosing that I have a mental health condition when I'm there, I'd be looking out for signs such as, have they signed the mental health at work commitment, which is 6 commitments that an organisation can sign up to in terms of really supporting employee mental health in a really meaningful, practical way. So have they signed up to that commitment? I'd also be looking for things on their website and on their pages about, do they have a Wellbeing Champions group or Wellbeing network? Do they have mental health first aiders? What are those benefits that you might get, and what policies do they have around mental health in particular, but all aspects of how they're going to support you as an individual. And then I'd also be thinking about, at the interview stage, before you even get to interview stage, have they asked whether you have any reasonable adjustments that you need to be able to be your best self at interview. I'd be looking out for all of those proactive ways organisations are looking after employee mental health and wellbeing, to sort of be an indication about whether I feel safe to disclose that I have a mental health condition.
So, oh, my dog's here. I think businesses can introduce dogs. That would definitely make new employees happier. So new businesses working with new employees or new hires to improve employee morale, employee well-being. It's really about making them feel safe and welcome. That's really it. It's two very important factors. Do you feel like you are safe in this environment, that you are supported, that you will be nurtured? And do you feel like you belong? They're really important groundwork for improving employee well-being, for managing new hires. You just have to make sure that you're connecting with them enough, that you're supporting them through a stressful deadline or their first deadline or their first big proposal. It's important that you have different points of the team reaching out and connecting with them. Other than that, it's kind of all the old usual things. Are they feeling like, are they having enough contact with the right people? Are they not overworking? You don't want to overwork new hires because you're just going to completely alienate them and burn them out way too quickly. Are you able to ensure that they are taking care of themselves, which is a really hard one, and it's a question about the employer's duty of care, but it's important that you make sure that they're not exhausted every day with the big bags under their eyes, and that they are engaging with the team. Are they learning? Are they understanding what's going on and understanding their role within the company? All of these are pretty basic, but they're really important to think about, because if you put yourself in their shoes, that's really how you learn the most. Learn what they're thinking, what they're scared of, and asking them above all else is the most important thing. Because by asking them and trying to understand their experience, you'll actually see the truth of what's going on for them. So make sure to ask and make sure that they feel safe and welcome.
So if you are onboarding virtually, first and foremost, can I just say you are in plenty of company. I myself joined my organisation 2 weeks before the first lockdown, and much of my induction process was online. It's a bit strange, and I understand your worries and your feelings about that, maybe isolation or loneliness that kind of virtual onboarding might lead to. I hear you and I feel you. And first and foremost, I think it's important just to recognise that actually it's a really common experience amongst everybody at the moment, whether you're starting a new job or not. We know from the latest ONS data that actually young people, more than any other generation, are more likely to report feeling lonely. And actually during this last lockdown, 1 in 4 people have reported that they sometimes feel lonely. So we know it's really common, and we also know it's really hard to talk about. There's still some stigma and discomfort around talking about loneliness, but you certainly aren't the only one. So in terms of actually how do we meaningfully foster those social connections and bonds to overcome these feelings of loneliness and isolation, there's a number of different ways you can do this, both sort of formally and informally within your organisation. So my first one that I'd recommend is, if you don't get given a buddy, as it were, formally as part of your induction process, find one, ask for one, someone who's been at the organisation for a little while and can help you navigate those first few weeks, help answer those silly questions you might feel too silly to ask other people, like what an acronym means that everyone's using, or so on. Find a buddy, even if it's yourself, just asking somebody and getting in touch and saying, is there someone who can help be my buddy through these next few weeks? I'd really appreciate it. Feel free to do that well within your right, and I think would really reflect well on you. Secondly, really utilise any networks that you might have, especially if you're joining a bigger organisation. They'll often have what they call employee networks. So this might be networks for employees who share a characteristic like being LGBT or being from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, a women's network or a men's network, even a graduate network in some organisations. So really seek out those different networks, foster those connections with people who share your values and beliefs, and any other clubs or activities there might be as well. I know there's a lot of book clubs and podcast clubs going on in many workplaces at the moment. So really utilise and find out what is available, and if there isn't one, start your own. That is definitely a good way to meet new people. And lastly, think about the connections and groups and communities that you have around you within your role. So for first and foremost, for everybody who's starting a new job, you'll almost certainly not be the only one, or if you are the only one, someone else would have joined in the not too distant past. So find out who your new starters are, suggest going for a virtual lunch or meeting up when we can, to really form that community, that new starter community, and foster that sort of shared experience as well.
So that brings our mental health and wellbeing session to a close. Thank you for joining us. I hope, like me, you found it useful. I hope you now feel a little bit more equipped to handle your mental health journey. I would just like to one more time say a huge thank you to Amy Henderson from Business in the Community, Alice Cooper from Student Minds, and Amy Louise Carton from Keep Happy for their fantastic advice. I know I have many takeaways and I'm looking forward to sharing them. I'm also looking forward to seeing yours. So don't forget, #IWD 2021, #Choose to Challenge.